The environment tasted distinctly of pressurized copper. Inside the iron walls of Chamber 14, the air grew heavy and thick enough to choke a full-grown warrior. The heavy metal panels of the ceiling groaned under the weight of 500 standard atmospheres. Across the central floor, 11 elite trainees from the highest bloodlines of the enclave lay flat against the stone plates. Their limbs shook, their external plates cracked, and their lungs rattled in the dark. No warning, no alarms, no chance. High-frequency sonic waves sliced through the deep-pressure training silo, turning their internal systems into jelly. Yet, in the absolute center of the crushing room, a 5-foot human female stood completely unmoved. Her canvas coat did not even rustle as she calmly slid a tiny metal pin into a maintenance seam, freezing the entire multi-million credit facility in a single, silent second. Would you have braced for the pressure? Because she didn't even check the dials. 3 hours before the walls began to groan, Inspector Orishal sat behind the reinforced glass of the intake desk. His primary vision array hummed as it scanned the incoming file of the final applicant for the Iron Civ Selection Corps. The digital page was short, sharp, and empty of any martial honors. Candidate 12 was listed simply as Elena Rostova, a 19-year-old biological entity from a low-tier planetary settlement. The system had flagged her file 3 times with a bright red border because she possessed no natural armor plates, no chemical defense glands, and no registered combat training. Orishal watched the low weight numbers dance across his data pad with a quiet sense of administrative annoyance. To the high officers of the sceptered enclave, biological bulk was the only metric that mattered. A species survived the deep space cold by growing thick, multi-layered shells of dense bone and chitin. The weak were filtered out by the sheer weight of gravity before they could ever hold a rifle. The heavy airlock doors slid back with a dull, hydraulic clunk that shook the stone floor. Elena Rostova walked into the intake station with a slow, heavy-heeled step that sounded completely wrong for a creature of her small size. She did not wear the standard compression suits of the Outer Rim academies. Instead, her small frame was swallowed by an oversized, faded canvas mechanic's jacket that smelled faintly of mineral oil and old soot. Her hands were small and bare, showing dark gray grease spots around the calloused knuckles. She stopped before the high desk, her eyes tracking the complex piping of the ceiling rather than the towering frame of the evaluator. "The manifest says your lineage is rooted in the subsurface foundries," Orishal said, his voice echoing off the iron walls. He did not look up from his screen. "This sector has a baseline gravity of 2.5 standard units. Your skeletal structure will begin to compress within 24 hours. "The air is dry," Elena said. Her voice was flat and steady. "It makes my eyes itch." Proctor General Jarokest stepped out from the shadows behind the monitoring booth. His 9-foot frame cast a massive shadow over the human candidate, his trisegmented obsidian carapace gleaming under the harsh halogen tubes. 4 emerald sensory stalks turned toward Elena, twitching in rhythmic disgust as his auxiliary respiratory filters emitted a sharp whistle. He wore 7 ancestral campaign sigils across his chest plates, each one earned by surviving the crushing weight of high-mass worlds. To him, the human was nothing more than an error of inclusion, a fragile piece of soft tissue that would burst like a ripe seed under the first pressure plunge. "The iron sieve does not accommodate soft skin," Jarokest stated, his primary mandibles clicking together with a sound like snapping dry wood. "The lithodermal brood has already filled 11 of the 12 slots for this cycle. Their density is 5 times your own. If you step into that chamber, the enclave takes no responsibility for your structural failure." Elena did not answer with words. She reached into her deep canvas pocket, her fingers brushing against something that made a light, metallic ring. When she pulled her hand out, she held a heavy, circular pocket watch made of raw, unpolished copper. The back plate was missing, exposing a tiny, turning maze of miniature gears and an open balance wheel that danced back and forth with a sharp click. The rhythmic mechanical click of the internal balance wheel provided an anchor against the facility's mounting atmospheric groan. Every 4 seconds, she used her thumb to twist the small winding crown at the top, completely ignoring the massive alien general before her. The 12 candidates were moved into Chamber 14, just as the primary suns of the outpost reached their peak alignment. The room was a massive, iron-shrouded cylinder designed to test the absolute breaking point of living tissue. Across the stone floor, a massive lithodermal cadet adjusted its internal compression valves, its rock-like hide turning a dark, defensive gray as its mass shifted. Next to it, 2 chitinous warriors from the sceptered enclave clicked their lower mandibles at a rate of 50 beats per minute, a biological reflex used to balance the fluid pressure in their sensory nerves before a drop. They stood like pillars of living stone, confident in their heavy shells. Alina stood in the far corner, near the primary console housing. She looked small, soft, and entirely out of place among the armored giants. She reached up with one bare hand to smooth a deep wrinkle on her left canvas sleeve, her movements completely casual. She looked directly at the primary intake grill on the wall. "The ventilation in here is remarkably drafty," Alina said toward the audio sensor. "Does anyone know if the environmental control unit has a manual dampener?" Behind the safety glass, Orozhal felt the rapid amber neural vessels across his mandibular plates begin to pulse with a sudden, anxious light. The question was entirely absurd. The chamber was already locking down, its automated system sealing the 3-inch plasteel barriers with a force that could sever an iron bar. The countdown on the main screen hit 0, and the primary gravity arrays flared into life. The pressure did not roll into the room, it struck like a physical hammer. The atmospheric regulators dropped the internal volume by 50% in less than 3 seconds, exceeding the standard critical deflation rate for new recruits. The air turned into a thick, shimmering fog of dense gas. Instantly, the 2 chitinous enclave warriors buckled. Their massive legs shook as the gravity wells shifted by 1.5 gs, forcing their heavy carapaces down toward the floor plates. Their internal skeletal structures emitted a low, wet cracking sound as they struggled to maintain their footing. Orozhal checked his diagnostic monitors, his fingers flying across the input keys to track the expected cardiovascular collapse of Candidate 12. He expected to see her pulse spiking toward a lethal stroke. Instead, the central monitor flashed a bright, anomalous amber light that did not match any known biological failure pattern. Alert: biometric anomaly detected. Subject: Candidate 12 ROSTOVA. Vascular pressure stable. Neurochemical output 0.02% adrenal chain. The bioscanner indicated that her resting heart rate was locked steady at 62 beats per minute. Her breathing remained slow, shallow, and perfectly even. She was not fighting the weight of the room. She had simply shifted her boots 2 inches apart, anchoring her small frame by aligning her weight with the structural seams of the floor plates. She was counting the steady, scraping clicks of the copper watch in her palm, completely detached from the panic around her. They buckled, they shook, they fell. By the 4th minute of the trial, the massive lithodermal cadet dropped heavily to its knees, its granular stone hide leaking pale fluid as its compression valves failed under the immense barometric drop. The remaining elite recruits lay scattered across the stone like broken beetles, their heavy armor turned into personal prisons by the relentless pull of the gravity arrays. The system, sensing that the subjects were resisting, automatically deployed its secondary neural assault phase. 4 high-frequency sonic emitters slid out from the iron ceiling panels, casting a sharp, 24 kHz vibration down into the chamber. The noise was designed to shatter the focus of elite minds, disrupting the nervous system until the body gave up its resistance. The remaining alien candidates shrieked, their sensory stalks twisting in agony as they lost all motor control. Alina Rostova did not scream. She did not even cover her ears. Her lineage had been forged in the grinding gears of subsurface foundries, where the roar of heavy steam stamps shook the teeth out of human jaws every hour of the day. To her, the high-frequency square AL of the Enclave's ultimate testing device was nothing more than a loose belt on an old exhaust fan. She stepped forward. Her heavy industrial boots made a sharp, intentional cadence against the reinforced stone, cutting directly through the chaotic frequency of the emitters. Orisjal watched from the glass, his mandibular vessels flaring into an intense violet purple that stung his own skin. He could not comprehend what the telemetry screens were showing him. The human was walking toward the master interface panel, while the air around her was heavy enough to flatten a standard transport vehicle. Before the main console, Elena paused for 3 seconds. She turned the crown of her copper pocket watch one final time, listening to the tiny tick with a look of quiet satisfaction. Then, she reached into her oversized canvas sleeve and withdrew a small, 4-centimeter steel gearpin tool, a mundane sliver of metal used by terrestrial mechanics to clear jammed cogs. With 3 casual, microscopic movements of her calloused thumb, she slid the steel pin into the 0.8 mm maintenance seam of the primary command housing. She did not use force. She did not strike the console. She simply wedged the tiny piece of homeworld steel between the main conductor plates where the internal circuitry met the outer frame. There was no blast, there was no fire, there was only silence. The tiny tool caused an instantaneous electronic short circuit that bypassed the master administrative authority loop of the entire silo. The high-frequency sonic emitters died with a soft, descending whine. The orange containment arrays dissolved into soft, harmless white ambient light as the atmospheric vents opened with a gentle, equalizing sigh. On Orisjal's master screen, the central defensive database automatically overwrote its own ancient protocols, flashing a single line of gray text. Proctor General Jarokest stood completely frozen in the observation box, his sensory stalks locked in a rigid, straight line that had not changed in 3 minutes. His decorated chest plates did not rise or fall. The security matrix had not registered an armed breach. It had recorded an empire realizing its walls were held together by assumptions. The ultimate tactical testing manual of the sceptered enclave had just broken itself against a 4-centimeter pin from an industrial dirt world. And there was no rule in the archive to explain how to punish a candidate who treated an execution loop like a routine maintenance shift. A faint, secondary notification chimed at the bottom of Orisjal's personal data pad, indicating that 3 more human mechanics from the same subsurface sector had just passed their entry medical clearance for the next training cycle. 6 months after the iron walls of Chamber 14 fell silent, Proctor General Jarokest was quietly transferred to a distant supply outpost in the Outer Rim sectors, far away from any tactical command decisions. The High Council did not issue a public decree, nor did they lock the human recruits out of the academy. Instead, they silently rewrote the Imperial Training Charter to ensure no unaugmented human was ever left unmonitored near a primary power junction. The tiny 4-centimeter steel gearpin now sat isolated within a pressurized vacuum display case in the central corridor of the High Academy Museum. A single, high-intensity halogen spotlight shone directly down upon the sliver of dark metal, its shadow cutting clean through the grand traditions of the martial hierarchy. Passing cadets from the highest bloodlines of the enclave walked past the glass every morning, their heavy carapaces shifting away from the display in a quiet, reverent caution that no one dared to put into words. Inspector Orisjal stood alone in the empty gallery long after the evening shift rotation had concluded. The violet pathways across his cranium had gone cold, leaving a faint, permanent gray stain beneath his mandibular plates. He looked down at his own massive, 3-fingered hands, noting the slight, persistent tremor that still returned to his joints whenever the deep corridors of the silo fell completely silent. A solitary copper watch wheel on the lower shelf reflected the cold light. The iron floor remained cold under the white lights. The long shadow of the pin touched the far wall,